We'll turn to our next guest on the panel, Tony Greenstein. He was born in London in 1953, and he comes from a Jewish Orthodox family. His father was a rabbi and witnessed the so-called Battle of Cable Street in 1936 when British fascists tried to march through the London East End. Tony is a Jewish anti-Zionist activist, and he's the founding member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Jews for Boycotting Israeli Goods. His latest book is called Zionism During the Holocaust, the Instrumentalization of Memory in the Service of State and Nation. And Tony is also an active trade unionist in his hometown, Brighton. Please give her your speech. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I first start with an exercise with the audience? Can anyone who has not been called an anti-Semite or a self-hater please put your hand up? I'm pleased to see one person. I think you have to examine your conscience, sir. Because anyone who hasn't been called an anti-Semite clearly isn't doing enough for the struggle. Because that is the world of lies, the Orwellian dystopian world that we live in, where to support the Palestinians, to oppose genocide, and to oppose Zionism, which gives birth to ethnic cleansing and genocide, makes you an anti-Semite. So today, being an anti-Semite is also to be an anti-racist, I'm afraid, in the parlance that we live in. But we should bear in mind that although most people today still think of Zionism and being Jewish as one and the same, of course, Christian Zionism predated Jewish Zionism by 4 centuries. It was the product, the idea of the return of Jews to Palestine was the product of the Reformation and the Renaissance. And it was the anti-Semites, above all, who believed that Jews did not belong in Europe. Wilhelm Marr was the most famous example, and that Jews were really Semitic and not of good European stock. For example, Zionism was forced on the Jews by the non-Jews. This is something which is often forgotten. I give the example, for example, when Lord Palmerston and the Earl Shaftesbury approached the border deputies between 1840 and 1842 to get them to issue a statement supporting the idea of a Jewish return to Palestine. And they refused. They said they wanted no part of it because the fight of Jews here was for emancipation, for the right to vote, for the right to stand for parliament, to have the same rights as non-Jews. And if they were to say and to admit that they were a different nation, an alien nation, then of course they would be relinquishing those rights. And the Earl Shaftesbury, for example, opposed Jewish emancipation, which came in Britain in 1858, and in Germany in 1871, and in France, I think it was 1791. So that was the Jews. And in Germany, when Hitler came to power, barely 2% of the Jewish people were paid up Zionists. And people forget that Zionism was in a minority everywhere in Europe before the Holocaust. And it could be said that I was quoted in the Jewish Chronicle about 5 years ago. I was at a Palestine Expo conference. I was just asked to comment really in a workshop. And I came out with it. It wasn't pre-planned or anything. I said, Israel was Hitler's bastard offspring. And the Jewish Chronicle, of course, ran this at front page, notorious anti-Zionist, says it again, and so on. But today, as we look at Gaza and what is happening in Gaza and the exterminationist mentality in Israel, for example, Elad Barashi, a well-known television producer in Israel, calls for the installation of gas chambers in Gaza. A poll by the Pennsylvania State University only last week found that 47% of Israelis wanted to kill every single Palestinian in Gaza. So an exterminationist mentality takes over Israel, and it was actually higher than 47% because most respondents said that 60% odd said that Amalek, the ancient biblical myth, was still relevant today. So we have the irony in Israel that they commemorate the Holocaust 3 times a year, but they don't understand, or they have this cognitive dissonance that they want to exterminate the Palestinians, and that is really what Israel has become today. And yet we have what I would call an anti-Semitism, official imperialist mentality. It is the ideology of our ruling classes, opposition to anti-Semitism. And even Donald Trump, who believes that all Mexicans are racist, the African countries are shithole countries, that he doesn't want anyone coming into America from Muslim countries, who attacks the Black Lives Matter movement. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, Donald Trump is with them. He's threatening to freeze the funds of American universities because of the terrible injustices done to Jewish students, Jewish Zionist students, of course, on campus. And it's not difficult, really, to see through this utter hypocrisy, this concern for Jews. If you think of some of the friends of Jews or Zionists today, Geert Wilders, Viktor Orban, our own Tommy Robinson and others, where would they have been 90 years ago when the Jews were being rounded up? Well, I know where Geert Wilders would have been. He would have been in the Dutch Fascist Party, the Dutch Nazi Party, the NSB. So today's defenders of Zionists 90 or 100 years ago would certainly not have been on the side of the Jews who are trying to escape the dragnets. And the question we have to ask ourselves is why has anti-Semitism become so potent? Why are Jews today the moral alibi for imperialism and what it does in the Middle East? Because where I disagreed with Garda yesterday is I know that Jews have a moral responsibility to speak out, but the idea that Jews are somehow responsible for what Israel is doing or what imperialism is doing is a myth. Zionism was always a non-Jewish movement, but they've co-opted Jews in order to provide themselves with that alibi. And one of the main reasons for why the very mention of the word anti-Semitism is so potent is because of the Holocaust, the extermination of 6 million Jews. Of course, they forget the Roma, they forget the disabled, they forget the gay, they forget the Russians, and all the other people, including 2 to 3 million Poles, incidentally. When the Nazis invaded Poland, they put into Operation Tannenberg, which was to destroy the Polish intelligentsia. More Jews died because they were members of the Polish intelligentsia than because they were Jewish between 1939 and 1941. People forget all this. But I think also, and this is why I wrote the book Zionism During the Holocaust, people forget what the Zionist record was during the Holocaust. To judge by what they say today, you would think the Zionists were obsessed with stopping the Holocaust or rescuing people during the Holocaust, but you couldn't be more wrong. The Zionists fought tooth and nail to stop anyone escaping from Europe if the destination was not Palestine. Stephen Weiss, the leader of the American Zionists, turned down the offer of thousands of places in Alaska, which was not subject to US immigration controls, unlike the rest of the United States. Why? Because it was too cold. The ovens of Auschwitz were, of course, much warmer. And they also forget what the Zionist attitude to the Nazis was. And I'll read from a letter that the Zionist Federation wrote to Hitler on the 21st of June 1933. They said, the activity of the they said, on the foundation of the new state, which has established a principle of race, fruitful activity for the fatherland is possible. Our acknowledgement of Jewish nationality provides for a clear and sincere relationship to the German people and its national and racial realities. Precisely because we don't wish to falsify these fundamentals, because we too are against mixed marriage and are for maintaining the purity of the Jewish group. The realization of Zionism could only be hurt by resentment of Jews abroad against the German development. Boycott propaganda is essentially un-Zionist. And that was right, absolutely right. The only Jewish group to welcome the Nazis to power was the leadership of the Zionist movement. And that is forgotten today. And it was reciprocated. For instance, on the 28th of January 1935, Reinhard Heydrich, the engineer of the final solution, wrote, the activity of the Zionist-oriented youth organizations that are engaged in the occupational restructuring of the Jews lies in the interest of the National Socialist state leadership. These organizations are not to be treated with that strictness that is necessary to apply to members of the so-called German Jewish organizations, brackets, assimilationists. And the paper of the SS in May 35, Schwarzkopf, wrote, the Zionists adhere to a strict racial position, and by emigrating to Palestine, they are helping to build their own Jewish state. The assimilation-minded Jews deny their race and insist on their loyalty to Germany or claim to be Christians, because you had the phenomena of Christian Jews. In other words, you were baptized. Your parents might have been baptized, but nonetheless, racially, you were still Jewish. That was a phenomena of the Nazis. And insist on their loyalty to Germany or claim to be Christians because they have been baptized in order to subvert National Socialist principles. And there was a kind of love affair between the Nazis and the Zionists. I mean, I don't have time to go into it, but I'll give you a couple of quotes. Berl Katznelson, who was an effective deputy to David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister and the most prominent figure in Zionist history, certainly pre-state Zionism. Berl Katznelson, a founder of Mapai, the Israeli Labour Party, an editor of its paper, Davar, saw the rise of Hitler as, quote, an opportunity to build and flourish like none we have ever had or ever will have. And that's quoted in Tom Segev's The Seventh Million and Francis Nicasier's Zionism and National Socialism. Zionism and anti-Semitism and National Socialism. Ben-Gurion was even more optimistic. He said, quote, the Nazis' victory would become a fertile force for Zionism, because in times of peace, Zionism was not adopted by the Jewish people. It was only in time of war, only in time of conflict, only in the times when Jews were being expelled that Zionism came into its own. And during the whole period of the Holocaust, when the Zionists were not actually denying there was a Holocaust, they had one goal and one goal only, and that was to build a Jewish state. And we have this very famous quotation from Ben-Gurion, which is in his own official biography, that given the choice between saving half Germany's Jewish children in Palestine or all of them in England, he'd prefer to have them, half of them sacrificed, but go to Palestine. That was in the context of the Kinder transport, which Britain agreed to 10,000 German Jewish children being admitted after Kristallnacht in November 1938. And Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who was one of the major leaders of German Zionism, confessed it was morally disturbing to seem to be considered as the favoured children of the Nazi government, particularly when it dissolved the anti-Zionist youth groups and seemed in other ways to prefer the Zionists. The Nazis asked for a more Zionist behaviour. And I want to finish really with the last person I'm quoting. He was the editor of the Zionist paper Die Welt between 1909 and 1911 and was a co-founder of the Encyclopedia Judaica. I refer to someone called Jacob Klatskin. who was well known for speaking it as it was. He didn't have any, if you like, vague and obscure formulations. When he said, if we do not admit the rightfulness of anti-Semitism, we deny the rightfulness of our own nationalism. Instead of establishing societies for defense against the anti-Semites who want to reduce our rights, we should establish societies for the defense against our friends who want to defend our rights. And that is the reality of Zionism. They may attack people as anti-Semites, but from the days of Herzl onwards, Zionism has always welcomed anti-Semitism. It was Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, who said that anti-Semitism has something of the divine will to good in it. And he wrote in his diaries that the anti-Semites will be our most dependable friends, the anti-Semitic countries our allies. And when we look around the world today, who are the friends of Zionism? They are the worst racists. And it is not surprising that now it's embarked on genocide in Gaza, those very same people are supporting them to the hilt. So thank you very much for listening to me. I say my book is on sale, but there aren't many copies left, I'm afraid. Thank you.